It was very important cultural and social moment in the life of the city.
Probably having heard this, you might think, how long between the work was written and its premiere? Very long. One of the greatest virtuosos of the first half of the 20th century, and a great inventor, famously an inventor of the windshield wipers on the cars. It's his patent.
Creating all of this from scratch without any support, without anything, just with a pure vision and incredible work ethic and artistic principles. Extremely interesting group.
Hello everyone, welcome to the newest episode of What's on Vienna, your immersive guide into the sometimes overwhelming world of the music and arts events in the city. We're approaching the end of the season now, which does not mean that we will be stopping with the episodes. We will then, similarly to last year, continue talking about summer festivals, which there are many of, but mostly around the city, so it will not be strictly in Vienna, but there is still plenty to do in the summer, I guess also in Vienna. Right?
Also
probably, right? But I mean, we are winding down now. This next part that we're talking about is basically the last month of the full season, right? Yeah. So, yeah, it's winding down, but there are still interesting things. So,
yeah, aren't we going to talk about weather as we usually do to give a bit of sense of the environment?
I mean, I'm hot, you're cold, clearly, based on what we are wearing, but...
I mean, your ritual worked last time, so it was around 10 degrees when we recorded last time, and then now it's 30, more than 30.
It is 30 but
plus.
We're still drinking warm tea, because we are crazy like that.
No, why? It's actually, it makes complete sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense, but...
Yeah, so I would like to talk about very big and one of the biggest and probably the most essential events to the city that we haven't talked until now. It's Wiener Festwochen, Vienna Festival Weeks, that is happening every year for around 5 weeks from the middle of May to the middle of late June. And this year is the 75th anniversary. And the motto of this year's edition is 75 years of beauty and scandal, which I personally find quite accurate because there has been always this kind of genuine striving for beauty and artistry, but there have been a lot of scandals and controversive programming, sometimes very provocative programming, and in the last years, the same this year. Some interesting people that very unexpected choices are being invited. Some other people are uninviting themselves because of those other invitations. So the first edition of this festival happened in 1951, back then when the city was still divided between the four allied powers, and you've discussed it before, that there was this time when in the first district there was this jeep with 4 people, with American, French, Soviet and British, and still in that time there was this initiative to organize this international festival that was very symbolic at the time, the symbol of that Vienna is ready to come back to the world, and it was very hopeful sign for the population of Vienna after the dark time of fascism and the war. So already in 1952, the Wiener Festwochen was the founding member of the European Festival Associations. And there are many interesting stories through the history, and one of those happened in the 70s, in the middle of 70s. There was one venue where the festival were organizing events. It was a former slaughterhouse on the edge of the city. By the way, it's very important to say that this festival was always had the goal to bring the events, this exciting contemporary art everywhere. So not just in the first district, the very, very center of the city, but all around the city. And it contributed a lot to the cultural infrastructure of the town. For example, Museumskvartier, that you might know, a very big cultural complex with a lot of exhibitions halls and museums. It was kind of almost like a direct initiative of this festival. And also this other venue that so that when the festival was finishing, the last production was happening there, and one of the people who were working on set was a young architect who discovered that the city silently promised this space to demolish and give it, sell it, rent it to a shopping mall, to build a shopping mall there. And the festival invited people to stay after the event, and they stayed, and there was this kind of a occupation of this space by the people of Vienna for the next 3 months, and like huge infrastructure was built there, spaces for children, cafe, cinema, and like hundreds of thousands of people went through this in these 3 months. Like big stars came there for a solidarity concert. And although after all of this, most of the space was still demolished, but some space is still active today from that big structure. But it opened up this discussion in the city, how much of the decision should be open to public, open for the discussion. It was very important cultural and social moment in the life of the city. So this year's edition is, as always, huge. It has almost 170 productions all over, more than 30 stages all over the city. Dance, contemporary art. There is a production of Parsifal, also world premieres, around more than 10 world premieres. And I will talk about one particular production a bit later that I would like to highlight. And so it's very diverse. The audience is extremely diverse. The one part of the audience is like teenagers in their late teens, and next to them are people in their 70s, 80s, and so on. So it also have a very nice financial policy. Like the pricing policy is very good for the young people under 30. It's very affordable. There are a lot of discussions that are part of the program of the festival, parties, meetings, everything, workshops, you name it. So it's a very vibrant platform, but as I said, with a bit of controversy to it almost every year. Yeah, so this is all about this.
On a completely unrelated note, but related to the weather, we have a little visitor who is a fly or a moth. I hope he's not really saying hello to the camera, but he or she, whatever, is flying around, zooming around the room. Or is it two of them?
Yes.
I think that they're friends. Okay. So yeah, now you really know it's summer because they're really enjoying the space and just like, Anyway, enough about the flights. Flies, not the flights. Yeah, I'm going to once again turn for inspiration of things to talk about, but they're really interesting in my defense. Again, to Teatr Anderveen, which I've been talking about, I think, for the last episodes in plural.
You're their spokesperson. I mean,
but I'm really impressed. So the next presentation is going to be on a double opera feature, which they are going to be doing. Both operas are very short, one-act operas, hence why they are doing double evenings. Now, how well they fit with one another is a question that will be left to the judgment of the audiences. They do fit well with one another thematically. Musically, I do not know. I have not heard any of these operas, as, once again, has the majority of people have not heard them. So I have an excuse. So this double feature, not to make a mistake, is Lady Magnesia by Mr. Weinberg. And, it has several names. Alexander Twice, or Alexander bis, or A Tragedy of a Man Without a Beard by Martinu. Okay, that's a lot. So which one I talk about first is kind of random, doesn't matter, but I will separate them in the conversation.
Sure,
yeah. So now talking about the what these two operas have in common, apart from being short, big plus for any opera, but these are, I think, really tiny. They're like one-act operas, is that they talk about the topic of infidelity and female infidelity. And this is once again the topic of the Verdi opera that we discussed, Stifelio, in our previous episode.
Obviously fascinating topic for the composers.
Yeah, so, or the season curator.
The season curator.
So, you know what, let me start with Weinberg, because the storyline of the second opera is so convoluted. Like, it's completely crazy, because that one is surrealistic opera. This one is more realistic. It's based on a play by Bernard Shaw, The Lady Magnesia. Now, what is it about? It's a husband who has a cheating wife. His wife is cheating with a butler, and the husband wants to kill the wife, attacks her with a knife, but she sneezes and the attack is broken up. It's supposed to be funny. It's a comedy.
Yeah.
And then the butler comes in and he wants to show off his new clothes, and then the husband gives him a poisoned drink, and he starts dying, suffering from extreme pain. And the wife is very sad, but she tells the husband, if I understood this correctly, that she is willing to transfer the love she has for the butler back to the husband. But in exchange, kind of, she wants to mourn him as if he were her husband. And the husband is very touched by this. I don't know why. And decides to...
you lost me already to give the transferring of the...
antidote to the suffering butler. And the antidote is plaster. So gips, you know, like that they use in construction. So first they use some plaster from the ceiling or walls, I don't remember, and he drinks it. It's not sufficient. And then what they do is that they have a statue made out of plaster, or gips, right, as they say in German, the bust statue of the wife, and they dissolve it in water, and that's enough plaster for him to drink to kind of be relieved of the pain. But then he dies anyway, and he transforms himself in a statue that stands kind of in such a position that he's kind of blessing the husband and wife. Fantastic story. I know you lost me. Everyone lost me. So probably having heard this, you might think, how long between the work was written and its premiere? Very long is the answer. It was not premiered until 2009 in Liverpool, where they have a Weinberg festival for some reason.
Yeah, but in this case, obviously, it's not related to the story. It's because of
I
the
don't
difficult
know.
circumstances.
Okay, I don't know.
Of
It
his
can be
life.
very interesting. The music, as is described, once again, I will be honest, I do not know this opera at all. Never heard it. Music is very eclectic. It has like just all sorts of styles, from Baroque to jazz to whatever, you name it. But I don't know. It could be very interesting to very, sophisticated. 2009, I double checked it, sorry. For very sophisticated opera connoisseurs. Now, if you've taken our recommendations, you might have seen like really a lot of the classics, slightly more adventurous, more romantic, blah, 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 contemporary repertoire. So this is really very niche works that you are not going to be able to see probably in the next decades, not just in Vienna, maybe all over. So it's worth it if you have time. Now, why I think it's particularly worth it, it's because they're doing it once again at the Kammeroper building in the first district, which is extremely charming. And I think it's worth going just to experience the hall. It's small. It's like really just perfect for the short, little weird operas. But they are supposed to be very humorous. Now, I would like to talk about the composer a little bit. I hope it's not too boring, just not too long, because we've never talked about Weinberg, and I think it is a good time to talk about him. You mentioned World War II, and the both composers I will be talking about are deeply affected. Their lives have been transformed, and not in a good way at all, by World War II, and they would have lived very, very differently, had the history of Europe of the time been very different. And Weinberg, he was of Jewish descent, a Polish person. He came from a very artistic family. His father was a conductor who was originally from Moldova. He was Moldovan conductor, and he was the only surviving member of his family because his family perished in the pogroms in Moldova at the time. And so he fled to Warsaw, found employment there, was living a pretty decent life. His wife, the mother of Weinberg, she was an actress from Odessa, so a very artistic family. He grew up surrounded by music. He was exceptionally talented as a pianist. So much so that he was able to substitute for his father already very early on and was just an exceptional student. And so he entered the conservatory, as you would expect, and was just studying beautifully, was very, very talented on the piano, so much so that Joseph Hofmann, who we also talked about, I believe, some time ago, one of the greatest virtuosos of the first half of the 20th century, and a great inventor, famously an inventor of the windshield wipers on the cars. It's his patent, but he has like over 70 patents, I believe. He was a very famous, at the time already, prominent piano teacher at the renowned Curtis Institute in America, and he offered Weinberg stipend to go and study in Curtis. And then it's a little bit unclear whether he really was not so interested in pursuing a pianistical career, or it was really the circumstances that held him back, because this offer came in 1938, and in 1939 obviously Germany invaded Poland and his life changed completely. It was then absolutely impossible to escape the country. His entire family perished in the Holocaust, which he didn't know until mid-60s about. He knew that they perished. He himself was encouraged to flee, and he walked, this really impressed me, walked to Belarus, to Minsk eventually, where he settled down, and he found home there. He found his home in Minsk by having walked there. A lot of people who were walking with him, also of Jewish descent, they did not make it. So he considered himself exceptionally lucky to have had survived this horrendous circumstances. Like I said, he is once again the only surviving member of his family. So like the family like twice lost everybody, which is absolutely horrible. And in Minsk, though, the war had not been presented, or how should I say, had not entered the Soviet reality yet. So he was able to continue his studies at the Minsk Conservatory, where he was very appreciated. His talent was immediately noticed. He was also playing piano, also composing. Like it was like a pretty decent circumstances were there for him. But then the war came also to Soviet Union, and then he was able to flee to Tashkent. Which a lot of people evacuated to. And another horrible, this is a very depressing story, but this is life, unfortunately. All of the musicians from Minsk who did not go to Tashkent, all of them died. So
Crazy.
And in these circumstances, then after Tashkent, basically eventually he ended in Moscow. And he finished his studies at the conservatory there. Eventually, he was accepted in the Union of Composers, which was big financial help for him. He was very close friends with Shostakovich, who was a huge champion of his, supported him during a lot of hardships of his life. But he forever remained a very proud Polish person, very connected to his roots, reading books, keeping the language, like in a great shape. So then eventually he kind of transferred his musical focus into composing for movies, where he found very, very, very big success. One of his greatest success is the soundtrack to the Winnie the Pooh, including all these like little patter songs and everything, which are like a very important part of the kids' repertoire. And so eventually he passed away in a very fragile financial situation in 1995.
95.
Half recognized by Poland, but then he never returned to Poland because in the 60s, for a while, like he was unable to leave Soviet Union.
But he was imprisoned also.
Yeah,
for,
exactly.
Like,
he was
in the time of Stalin.
So in Stalin's time, he had to go to prison because of his Jewish heritage in part. But once Stalin died, he was released, and Weinberg himself usually said that it was not that bad, this imprisonment. Now, how true that is a whole different question, why he said that. And then he was in a very long time on a no-travel list, but then in 1960s, he was allowed to travel to Poland, to Warsaw, actually, for the Autumn in Warsaw, very, very, very famous new music festival, which for us pianists, Ligeti, side note, has dedicated the fantastic piano etude, Autumn in Warsaw. And so he went to Warsaw and he discovered that his family had died. Almost all of his friends, except one person, had died. And the city had changed. Obviously, Warsaw was greatly affected by World War II and was unrecognizable. And so he said he had nowhere to go back to, because I guess all of those years he was holding on to this hope for 30 years that he would go back to Poland, and he didn't. So like a very tragic life story. At the same time, there are some like brighter parts, like when he was writing for movies, he was successful, he had some stability, and he had a possibility to compose a lot. And there is kind of undiscovered, I mean, late in recent years discovered, but not so much played, honestly, work that he left behind, especially as a pianist. I mean, this should be so interesting, his works out, because he was a prodigious, absolutely, undoubtedly prodigious master pianist. So,
among instrumentalists, Hidon Kremer was the one who started opening his works for the audience.
He had a lot of collaborations with Oystra, for example. Also in 50s and 60s he wrote things for him, but then the Soviet times, half of his works were being banned, half were unbanned. It was just like a nightmare, like. So the fate of this opera is not surprising, that it was not composed, although not premiered, although he composed it in 1975, relatively late in his life. So anyway, he died in 1995. He was recognized by Poland. He got some, I don't remember exact name, sorry, some recognition title from the Ministry of Culture that was delivered personally to his apartment, because he had very, very bad health. This is one other thing that I should mention. He had a very complicated form of tuberculosis that had affected him for his entire life. That's why he was not enlisted in war. He was like so sick, he was not even fit to be taken to World War II. So I should tell you like that he was an extremely sick person. So anyway, this is all very sad, but like after his death, as usually happens, he got some champions of his work, and like as you see, there is even a whole festival dedicated to his work in Liverpool. So yeah, I don't know what to expect from this opera musically, but it's definitely worth exploring and giving a chance to someone who struggled so much in his life to stay a composer, and like, let's say that the opera deserves a chance.
Of course. Is it in the beginning of very beginning of June, or you don't remember? I will check the dates later.
Okay. Sorry. I don't know. 13?
It's extremely sad, but it's wonderful that at least now these works we have a chance to hear them and explore.
Exactly. Absolutely.
But it's very tragic.
Sorry, I want to put everyone in a very bad.
No, I mean it's as you said.
Sorry, I wanted to mention one name. There is a Swedish judge whose name is Tommy Persson, who is the champion of the Weinberg estate and his works. Somehow he got into it, and he like sponsored and funded a lot of the things. That's not a very important name, but important
it is
to mention.
Very important. It's great. And the production which I was going to talk in the Wiener Festwochen, it has also, of course, very strong connections to war. This is a production by a collective. It's a laboratory of contemporary opera Aperta, based in Kiev. And they are premiering, they premiered this opera already in May in Kiev, and I believe they had the performances in Rotterdam, and then they're coming now to Vienna. So it's a very unique chance to experience this group of amazing artists. The opera Aperta, it refers to the concept of the Italian philosopher and writer Umberto Eco. There is a whole book, Open Work, which is discussing and reflecting on the art form. So put simply, it's about a view that work is not a isolated, closed structure, but it's open for the interpretation, for the audience and collaboration. And this is very much the spirit of this particular group. It was founded by two Ukrainian composers, Ilya Razumeyko and Roman Grigoriev, and they have been collaborating on numerous projects for almost maybe 30 years. Since they were very, very young students or even pupils, very young composers, they founded a big festival of contemporary art in Ukraine. They also had a lot of artistic projects, opera productions, and it's amazing. Now it's obviously it's extremely challenging. In the time of war, how they're working, how they're developing their opera with this fantastic artists that they collected, but also even before, they were basically creating all of this from scratch without any support, without anything, just with a pure vision and incredible work ethic and artistic principles. Extremely interesting group. And this particular opera, the name is Mōdraniht, the winter songs of the war. Now I'm not sure about Mōdraniht. Yes. And it's about this, it comes from the Norse mythology, about this night of 21st of December when some rituals were executed to protect from the evil spirits. And this is a third opera of their ecological cycles of operas. I've seen the first opera. It's an archaeological opera, Chornobyldorf, and Chornobyldorf is referring the title to two places where the nuclear plants have been and had this one that the tragic story of Chernobyl. And could you help me? So I'm pronouncing it Zweimal. It's a city on the Danube in Austria, where in the 70s Austria built a nuclear plant. And according to today's calculation, it was about like 1.5 billion euros. So it's a huge project. And when it was built, because the opposition to the government was very against it, they decided to have a referendum. First it was they were trying to make these decisions through parliament. It didn't work, so there was this first referendum after the Second War. It was also it's very interesting because there were just 3 referendums after 1950s until today, and this is one of those. And the result was very close. It was like 50% 49, but against using. So it never actually worked. So they built it completely, and it didn't even work for one day. And now you can go there. There are guide tours. I think it's even free, and you can go, and it's a very unique case when you can experience this nuclear plant. But it's of course off topic. I just thought it's interesting because it's related to Austrian, very unusual story. And so this opera, Chornobyldorf, it's Zweimal, Chernobyl. It's a mix. If I will just describe it, the elements, it would not give you any information, but everything was present. It was music, it was dance, it was theater, it was electronic music, techno music, folk, singing, I don't know, film, visuals, everything which you can imagine in contemporary theater. But I was so impressed by this opera, and impressed maybe not the right word. It had very big effect on me, very big impact that I personally expect from experiencing art. It was really a transformation. It was a very new perspective, very fresh feeling of the things, and I have been under huge influence after seeing this production for a very long time, and even today I have this feeling. So I am very much looking forward to this opera, and I'm sure it's going to be amazing. They also had a part of the performance at the opening of the festival with their fantastic artists, and it was very strong, very, very strong performance. And they also brought one piece by Roman Grigoriev, one of the composers, where he uses the part of the Russian missile that actually hit the city, and he composed a piece for it. And I think it was extremely powerful message at the opening of the festival, also for the audience, because I don't think there would be a better way to bring this a bit closer to this feeling and understanding this horror which is happening, and which is important. I believe it is important, so everybody can contribute towards this fight against evil. So please have a look. I highly encourage you to. There are very few tickets left, so run now, and I'm sure it will be very, very exciting. By the way, it's 16 years plus, so it's there is some restrictions. A lot of productions of this festival have these restrictions, by the way. Yes, so maybe we can move to Martinu.
Yeah, so we have a very big focus on Eastern Europe in today's episode, for a good reason. Very interesting works, interesting people. Martinu is another composer, very important composer that we've never had somehow chance to talk about, right? We've never talked about Martinu. Now, a little bit, okay, this is not a little bit similar. I tried to make a parallel. It's not quite similar, right? So before Weinberg, Polish, Martinu, Czech, but Martinu is quite a bit older than Weinberg. But still, their lives were heavily affected by World War II and went in very different directions. Now, about Martinu, he was also a very sickly child. Interesting nuance. His father was a shoemaker, so a very, very simple family. But his talent was so obvious and so, how should I say, apparent to the people of the town where he was born. He was playing violin from a very early age, that the people of the town amassed the money for him to go and study in Prague. So he would be funded. So that's how much they cherished and respected him and liked him. Now, what he did with this opportunity, not very much, because he was a terrible student in Prague. He was very, very lazy. He did not appreciate this, very strict, very rigorous way of being educated. And at the same time, he was kind of learning and exploring on his own terms. And he had this incredible ability to memorize works and write them, analyze them deeply. And he was especially amazed and impressed by impressed by French Impressionism. And he was really astounded by this music that he wanted to explore, and it became his dream to move to Paris to study. So after his unsuccessful years in Prague, where he eventually got kicked out of the conservatory, and then went back to his hometowns, he somehow, this I don't know exactly the details of, and I guess no one cares, he managed to get a stipend from the Ministry of Education to go study in France. So with a stipend. So he was getting lucky also, with this like financial possibilities. And then he went to Paris and he studied there, and he like really absorbed everything. Especially interesting was his exposure to the jazz music, and these were very important formative years in his life. And so the opera, this Twice Alexander Bees, or The Tragedy of a Man Without a Beard. These are all separate titles, not all in one. Is one of his earlier works. It's composed in 1939, I believe. Let me check this. I don't know why I'm checking this. Nobody cares, but still. So
What
is
it?
Yeah, it is 1937, and the story is extremely complicated. It's meant to be surrealistic, but you can imagine the times in Paris, like this obsession with this uber avant-garde creativity. So the story takes place in 1900s, also in Paris. It's a very bourgeois upscale family where Martinu wanted to have this, he requested from a librettist, to have a talking cat who narrates the storyline, but he did not get a cat. Instead, he got a talking family portrait. So the story is told from the perspective of a family portrait, which is like a talking head.
That's quite a big jump from the cat to the portrait.
And why the librettist was so inflexible on the cat versus portrait, I do not know the details, but he got the talking head. So the story is that in the morning, the husband leaves for the train station to pick up his cousin who is coming from America. And the husband has a beard. Mm-hmm. And then he leaves, and then when he comes back, he has no beard, but that's now the cousin.
Oh my God.
And in the meantime, there is a cyclist whose name, maybe not a cyclist, his name is Claude. He comes to seduce the wife, and he's wearing sports outfit, and he wants to take the wife out cycling, which is somehow a form of seduction, but she says no to him. And afterwards, she has a very strange surrealistic dream when all of these scenarios come together, and I don't know. Anyway, it's a very convoluted story. I think we should see the opera to be able to understand what's going on. But she somehow cheats on the husband with the cyclist Claude, I believe. But this bearded and unbearded versions of the husband, that was very, very confusing to me. Now, the music is also very eclectic. So this is the similarity with this lady Magnesia. But I guess it can be fun if you don't try to find too much sense and too much depth and storyline in the libretto. I guess it's meant to be confusing and surrealistic, very much in the spirit of the time. Just a couple more words about Martinu himself. He was quite happy in Paris. He had a good time. He was very patriotic, Czech. And when Czech Republic was also annexed by Germans, he wanted to somehow support them. He was trying to enlist in the resistance, Czech resistance. He was too old and too sick, so they didn't take him. So he was supporting them musically and was like dedicating works to them. And that got the attention of the Nazis, and they put him on like a blacklist. So when the Nazis were coming into Paris, he was actually in danger, and he had to flee. At the time, he was already married to a seamstress who was exceptionally supportive of him as a composer, but they had a very complicated marriage because they had a lot of cultural differences, but she really was like a super wife in terms of, supporting his career. And so they fled, and they stayed for half a year in Aix-en-Provence. And then from there, over Marseille, they fled to Portugal, and then eventually to America. And in America, he had very big success, because until that, he had made acquaintance of, conductor of Boston Symphony Orchestra, who adored his work, and he helped get it, premiered in America, and all of the major orchestras in America had played his works. Yeah, so he was like very,
Wonderful.
Very appreciated. He had no money, so his passage was paid for by his friend, Swiss friend, conductor of the Basel Symphony Orchestra. Also, I don't remember the name. I should probably remember the name. Paul Sacher is his name, not to be confused with the Sachers of the Sacher Hotel, and he paid for everything. Then he arrived in New York, didn't like it there. His wife also didn't like it there. They didn't speak English. He said Manhattan was too loud to compose. He didn't have many work opportunities, but his music was being performed. So then they moved to Queens. Then he was like a little bit more calm there. His wife, like I said, did not want to stay in America. So eventually in the 50s, they moved back to France, to Nice for 2 years. Then went back to America and then still came back to Switzerland. And that's when he died. So like complicated life story, but still much more productive and I would say happy than that of Mr. Weinberg. So yeah, this is the story of the two operas, both of them completely unknown to general public, maybe somewhat known, I don't know, but interesting works to explore, I believe. Definitely interesting composers to talk about, composers that are not as much performed as I would say they deserve. Not to say that Martinu is not performed, of course, he's a huge name, but you know what I mean. So
this is the reason why Martinu was so much more known than Weinberg, for example.
Yes. So life circumstances obviously play a huge role. Yeah, he had also teaching opportunities. He was teaching in Tanglewood. He was a professor, invited professor in Princeton, invited professor of the Academy in Rome. Like just you could really see he was extremely well respected and had a very, appreciated, at least comfortable life. So this is then the end of our episode, which had this big focus on Eastern Europe, extremely heavy themes we touched on today, but such is life. And unfortunately, war is still part of our lives, daily lives, unescapable. And sometimes we have to also touch on this somber topics.
Of course. And we will see you soon with new events. And please subscribe, follow,
like and comment.
If like any questions or any experience you would like to share, we would really like to stay in touch with you.
Bye.